She had prayed to die for a whole year. After burying her husband and her little boy in quilts she made with her own hands, Clara Thornton stopped believing God was listening. Then, one freezing night, a child's cry cut through the blizzard outside her cabin door. A little girl, lips blue, barely breathing, and a desperate father who would do anything to save her. Clara pulled them from the snow, never knowing that this single act of kindness would drag her into a war she never asked for. A powerful woman wanted that child. She had money, connections, and a plan to destroy anyone who stood in her way. But she made one fatal mistake. She underestimated a widow with nothing left to lose. What happens when a broken woman finds something worth fighting for? Stay until the end, because this story will show you that sometimes the people who save us are the ones we never expected. This story teaches us that opening your door to a stranger can open a door inside yourself you thought was locked forever. It reminds us that family is not about blood. It is about who shows up when the storm hits and refuses to leave. Sometimes the worst chapter of your life is just preparing you for the best one. And the courage to start over is the greatest gift you can give yourself. If this story moved you, leave a comment and tell me, have you ever found hope in the most unexpected place? I read every single one. Hit that like button if you believe broken people deserve second chances. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that reminds you how strong you truly are. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their best days are still ahead. Your share might be the sign they have been waiting for. The winter of 1875 came down hard on the Colorado mountains. Clara Jane Thornton watched the sky turn a bruised purple from her cabin window. For 3 days, the world had been vanishing under a blanket of white. She saw her reflection in the cold glass, hollow cheeks and tired eyes. "Does not matter," she whispered. "Nobody is coming to see." Her world was one room, one hearth, and one bed. A rifle hung over the door, and a Bible sat on the table, untouched since the funeral. It had been 4 years since she buried her husband Thomas and her boy Samuel. She wrapped them in the very quilts she had made for their future. Clara turned from the window and took stock of her life. Half a sack of flour, a bit of hard cheese, some dried meat, and 3 potatoes. It might last a week. She had survived worse. By noon, the wind was howling like a cornered animal. Clara stuffed rags into the cracks in the walls, feeding the fire with wood she chopped herself. Thomas would have fixed those gaps, she thought, then stopped herself. Talking to the dead was a habit she had mostly kicked. By evening, the blizzard was a screaming white wall. Clara barred the door and told herself the sounds were just the wind. Then a cry cut through the storm, a child's cry. Her blood ran cold. She grabbed the rifle and threw the door open. Snow hit her like a fist. She squinted into the fury, her heart pounding. Then she saw it, a small shape stumbling through the deep snow. Clara did not think. She just ran. The snow grabbed at her legs and the cold burned her lungs. "Hold on!" she shouted into the wind. "I am coming!" The small shape fell. Clara pushed forward, 20 feet, then 10, then 5. A little girl lay face down, her coat far too thin for this cold. She was not moving. Clara dropped to her knees and turned her over. The child's lips were blue, but her eyes fluttered open. "Mama," the girl whispered. Clara's heart seized. For a moment she saw her own son, Samuel. "I am not your mama," Clara said, her voice rough. "But I will get you inside." A man's voice, ragged with fear, called out, "Lily!" He appeared from the storm, tall and wild-eyed. He reached for the child. "She ran," he gasped. "Saw a light." "Inside," Clara ordered. "Now, both of you." The man lifted the girl, and Clara led them back through the blizzard. When they reached the porch, she shoved the door open. They fell into the warmth of the small cabin. Clara slammed the door and barred it against the storm. The man was on his knees, holding the child to his chest, shaking from cold and fear. His coat was fine wool, now soaked and ruined. His boots were expensive. This man had money. "What in God's name are you doing out here?" she demanded. The man looked up. His eyes were gray, full of a grief she knew well. "We got lost," he said. "The horses bolted in the storm. We have been walking for hours." "With a child?" Clara asked. "Were you trying to get her killed?" Pain flashed across his face. "We were visiting my wife's grave, up on Miller's Ridge." Clara's anger vanished. She knew that ridge and the pioneer cemetery where it took 3 men to dig one grave in the hard ground. "I am sorry," she said quietly. The man shook his head. "She needs to get warm. Please." Clara moved without a second thought. She pulled the good quilt from her bed. The quilt still smelled like home from before the fever. She wrapped it around the little girl. "Get her by the fire. I will heat some broth." The man carried his daughter to the hearth. He moved like a man running on sheer will. Clara hung a pot over the fire and added the last of her venison broth. It was not much, not for 3 people, but she would manage. "Lily," the man said softly. "Lily, can you hear me?" The child stirred. "Papa, I am here." He pressed his forehead to hers. "You are safe now." Lily's eyes found Clara. Her face was pale, but her eyes were curious. "Are you an angel?" she asked. Clara almost smiled. "No, child. Just a woman with a fire." The man looked up at her, and for a long moment, the only sounds were the crackling fire and the wind outside. "Thank you," he said at last. His voice broke. "I do not know how to—" "You do not need to thank me," Clara said, turning back to the broth. "You need to get out of those wet clothes." "There is a blanket in the chest by the bed," she said. He hesitated for a second. "I'm not going to look," Clara said plainly. A small smile touched his face, making him look younger. He did as she said. She kept her back turned until he was wrapped in the blanket, his fine clothes steaming by the fire. "The broth is thin," she warned, pouring it into bowls. "But it is hot." She gave the largest share to Lily. "What do you say, sweetheart?" the man prompted. "Thank you, ma'am," Lily whispered. "My name is Clara," she said. The man nodded as he took his bowl. "I am Nathaniel, Nate, and this is Lily." Clara sat with them, eating her small portion of broth. She tried not to think about how she had just shortened her own survival. Some things were more important than food. Soon, Lily's eyes began to close. "She can have the bed," Clara said. "I will sleep by the fire. We cannot take your bed." "I was not asking," she replied. Nate looked at her, his expression changing. "You are giving us everything you have." "I am giving you shelter," Clara corrected him. "That broth was the last of your meat." Clara's jaw set. "You always notice so much?" "It is a habit," he said, almost smiling. "A bad one." Lily was now asleep on the floor. Nate gently lifted her and carried her to the bed. He tucked the quilt around her and kissed her forehead. Clara watched, her heart aching with a familiar pain. Her Thomas used to do that for Samuel every single night. She had to look away. "She has been through a lot," Nate said, returning to the fire. "Her mother—" He trailed off. "You do not have to tell me," Clara said. "I know grief." "But you saved our lives," he said. "It seems you should know who you saved." Clara poured the rest of the broth into his bowl. "Drink this, you're still shaking." He took the bowl. The firelight cast long shadows on his face, showing every line of exhaustion and sorrow. "Margaret passed on 2 years ago," Nate finally said, his voice quiet. "She was in childbirth. The baby was a boy. He did not make it either." Clara's hands stopped moving over her empty bowl. "I was up in Denver," Nate said, his tone empty of feeling, "selling off some cattle. By the time I received the message, by the time I rode all the way back, he just shook his head. They were both already in the ground." "That was not your fault. I should have been there. You had no way of knowing. I should have been there." When his eyes met hers, Clara saw the guilt that was eating him alive, a burden he would carry forever. A husband belongs with his wife. A father belongs with his family. I was out chasing money we did not even need. He stopped talking, his jaw tight. Clara understood that kind of silence. She had lived with it for 4 long years. I lost my husband and my son, she said softly. Typhoid fever. It took them both in the same week. I nursed them around the clock. Did every single thing the doctor told me to do, and they still died. That was not your fault either. She looked straight at him. Neither was yours. But we carry it all the same. We just do. Some days, she hugged herself tightly. Some days, that is all you have. They sat without talking for a good long while. Outside, the storm howled. But inside the small cabin, a change had happened. 2 strangers, connected by loss, sharing the warmth of a single fire. I ought to pay you, Nate said after a time, for the meal and the shelter. I do not want your money. No, let me. I said no. Clara's voice was suddenly sharp. I did not pull you from a snowbank for money. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Because that little girl cried out for her mama, and I could not just leave her. Her voice broke. She had not cried in 3 years. She thought she was all out of tears. But something about this night, this storm, this child, and this man with his gray, grief-filled eyes had broken through her defenses. I am sorry. She stood up quick, turning her back to him. I do not usually get like this. Clara. His hand rested on her elbow, gentle and careful. You do not have to say you are sorry, he said softly. Not to me. She took one shaky breath and then another. When she turned around, his eyes were not filled with pity. They were filled with understanding. One night, she said, her voice more steady. The storm should pass by morning. Then you can go on your way. Nate just nodded. One night. He did not argue. He just accepted. She wrapped her thin blanket around herself and sat down near the fire. She knew she would not sleep. She never could with strangers in the house. She would just rest her eyes and keep watch, or so she told herself. But as the hours crept by, her gaze kept drifting to the man sitting against the far wall, watching his daughter. He had not slept a wink either. He would check on Lily, fix her blankets, and gently brush the hair from her face. He was a good father. The sight of it caused a deep ache in her chest. You should get some rest, Clara said in a low voice. I cannot. Nate's voice was rough with weariness. Every time I shut my eyes, I see her running out into that blizzard. She is safe now, because of you. He looked over at her. I have met all kinds of people, Clara. Rich folks, powerful folks. Not a single one of them would have done what you did for us. Then you have been meeting the wrong kind of people. Maybe. He paused for a moment. Or maybe you are just what? He shook his head. Nothing. I am just tired, saying things I ought not to. Clara wanted to ask him what he meant, but she held her tongue. Get some sleep, she said instead. I will keep watch. You have been watching all night long. You must be worn out. I am used to it. That does not make it right. Does doing right have a place in surviving? Nate's face softened. Is that all this is to you? Survival? Clara thought about her little cabin, her lonely days, and the long, quiet nights. It is all I have left, she said, the words hanging heavy in the air. Nate gave a slow nod. Then he just closed his eyes and let the tiredness take him over. Clara watched the fire burn down to glowing coals. She saw the snow drift up against the glass. She watched the man and his little girl sleeping in her home, filling up spaces that had been empty for 4 long years. Something stirred deep in her chest. A dangerous feeling. Hope. She pushed it down right away. Hope was for fools. Hope got you hurt. They would be gone in the morning. Her life would go back to being quiet and alone, and this night would just be a memory. That is what she told herself. But as the sun started to light up the frosted window, Clara felt something she had not felt in years. She did not want them to leave. And that scared her more than any blizzard. Morning came, cold and gray. Clara woke up and found Nate was already awake, feeding her fire with logs she had stacked by the door. "You did not have to do that," she said, sitting up. He looked over his shoulder. "Could not sleep. Figured I would make myself useful." Lily was still sound asleep in the bed, her face calm. Clara hoped she was having happy dreams. Children deserve happy dreams. "Storm is still going," Nate said. Clara went to the window. He was right. The snow was still coming down, lighter now, but steady. The whole world was just a blur of white. "Could be another day," she said. "Maybe two." Nate's jaw got tight. "We have taken too much from you already." "You have taken what I offered," Clara shot back. "Do not insult me by pretending I am some charity case." "Can you afford it?" The question was straight and honest. Clara's silence was his answer. "Let me help," Nate said. "I can hunt. I can fish. I will earn our keep. I have hunted in weather worse than this." "That is foolish." "Maybe," he said, reaching for his damp coat. "But I will not sit here and eat your food if I did not help get it." She knew that look. It was pride. She had worn it herself enough times. "There are traps down by the creek," she said, finally giving in. "East side, about half a mile. If something is in 'em, it is yours." He was already heading for the door. "Nate." He stopped, his hand on the latch. "Be careful." Clara's voice was rough. "That little girl needs her father." A look flickered in his eyes. "That child needs more than I can give her." Before Clara could say a thing, he was gone, swallowed up by the snow. She stared at the door for a long minute. Then she turned and saw Lily was awake, just watching her. "He is coming back," the little girl said, her voice sure as anything. "He is." Clara sat down on the bed. "Of course he is. My mama did not come back." Lily's dark eyes looked too old for her small face. "She went to heaven and did not come back." The words felt like a punch. Clara remembered her own Samuel asking for her to come back, and she had promised she would. A promise she broke every single day just by living when he could not. "Your papa is strong," Clara said. "He will come back." "Promise?" It was a child's question, simple and asking for everything. Clara knew she should not promise. She could not control the storm or fate. But Lily's eyes were so bright with hope. "I promise," Clara heard herself say. Lily gave her the first real smile Clara had seen, and something inside Clara's chest cracked open a little more. "Are you a mama?" Lily asked. Clara's breath hitched. "I was. Once." "What happened?" Clara's throat felt tight. "He went to heaven, just like your mama." Lily thought about that for a second. Then she reached out her small, warm hand and took Clara's. "I am sorry," she said, all serious. "That is very sad." Clara could not speak. She just sat there, holding this stranger's child's hand, feeling tears she thought had dried up years ago burning in her eyes. "Do you miss him?" Lily asked. "Every day." Lily nodded like it all made perfect sense. "I miss my mama every day, too. Papa says that just means we love them real big." "Your papa is right." "He is right about most things," Lily said, tilting her head. "He is sad a lot, though. Like you." Clara blinked. "Like me?" "You have the same kind of eyes," Lily said. "The kind that look far away even when you're looking right at something." "How old are you?" Clara asked, changing the subject. 6 3/4. "You are very smart for 6 3/4. Lily's face lit up. "My mama always said that, too." Her smile faded a little. "I try to remember everything she told me. Clara squeezed her hand. "You will not forget the important parts. The love that stays." "Promise?" There was that word again. "Promise," Clara said. They sat there in a comfortable quiet, listening to the fire crackle while the storm howled. Clara started telling Lily about Samuel, his laugh, the way he would chase the chickens. Lily listened to every word, then told Clara about her own mother, how she sang songs at night and made the best apple pie. It was just two strangers sharing pieces of the people they had lost. It hurt, but it was a good kind of hurt. By the time Nate came back, half froze, with 2 rabbits in his hands, Clara and Lily were not strangers anymore. "See? I told you he would come back," Lily said with a grin. Nate looked right at Clara. He did not say a word, but his eyes were full of a thanks so deep it made her look away. "Fool," she said, taking the rabbits from him. "You could have died out there." "It was worth it," he said, shaking snow from his coat. "A man earns his keep." Clara almost smiled. "Says who?" "Says me," he said, meeting her eyes. "And my father before me." She looked down at the fat rabbits. They would have enough meat for days. "Well then, I reckon you have earned another night's stay," she said. Nate's smile was quick, but it was real. "Reckon I have." That night they ate good. Clara made a thick stew with the meat and some potatoes she had been saving. They sat around the fire and Lily told jokes she had learned from cowboys back home. "Why did the cow go to the picture show?" she asked, giggling. "I do not know," Nate said, playing along. "Why?" "To see the movies," Clara laughed. A real laugh. The sound was rusty and felt strange coming from her own mouth. Lily beamed with pride. Later, after the little girl was asleep, Nate and Clara sat by the fire. The storm had finally quieted down. "She likes you," Nate said softly. "She is a sweet girl." "She has not always been," he said, staring into the coals. "After Margaret died, she did not speak for 3 months. The doctor said it was the shock. I thought—" He swallowed hard. "I thought I had lost her too." Clara's heart ached for him. But she came back. Slowly. Still. There are days she wakes up screaming. "I just do not know how to—" He trailed off. "I do not know how to be enough for her." "You are enough." "Am I?" he asked, his eyes filled with doubt. "I have money, land, but I cannot give my daughter what she really needs." "What is that?" "A mother," he said, the word sounding broken. "Someone to teach her things I do not know how to do. Braid her hair, answer her questions." He shook his head. "I try, Lord knows I try, but I am failing her." Clara thought of Lily's bright eyes and easy laugh. "That child is happy," she said with force. "She is hurting, yes, but she is happy. You did that." "She is happy now. With you," he said. The words hung in the air between them. Clara felt her breath catch. "Nate, I am not—" He held up a hand. "I am not asking for anything. I I notice things. The way she looks at you, how she laughed tonight. She has not laughed like that since—" He stopped himself. "Since her mother died," he finished. The fire popped and the wind whispered through the trees. "I am not her mother," Clara said. "I know. I am just a widow in the woods with nothing to offer." "You offered us everything," Nate's voice was strong. "Your food, your shelter. You did not have to. Most people would not have. What could I possibly want from you?" "Nothing," he said, his eyes burning into hers. "That is the point. You did it because it was the right thing to do, because you are—" He stopped again. "Because I am what?" He just shook his head. "Get some rest. We will be out of your hair tomorrow." Clara should have felt relieved. She wanted them gone, did she not? Her quiet solitude, her safe, empty life. But seeing Nate near his sleeping daughter, his hand gently resting on her, Clara felt a pang of regret for the first time in 4 long years. She didn't want them to leave, and she had no earthly idea what to do about it. The storm finally broke on the 3rd morning. The silence was so deep it rang in Clara's ears. All she could hear was the crackle of the fire and the soft breathing of the 2 souls who had become too familiar, too fast. This was the day they would go. She rose and went to the window, seeing a world of white and gold. Beautiful, but passable. It stopped. Nate's voice startled her from behind. It stopped, she agreed, her back still to him. A heavy silence hung in the air, full of things unsaid. "I ought to find the horses," he said, his voice carefully plain. "They'll be sheltered in the canyon south of here. We'll be gone by noon." "Out of your way," Clara finally said, turning to face him. He stood by the cold fireplace, already dressed. His face was a closed book, but his gray eyes held something she just could not name. "Lily is still asleep," she murmured. "Yesterday wore her out." The child had been quieter, clinging to Clara's hand for hours while Nate, ever watchful, patched a weak spot he'd found on the roof. The man saw everything: the loose floorboard, the door that always stuck, her dwindling woodpile. He had fixed what he could, never asking for thanks. "Nate," he stopped at the door, his coat half-buttoned. Clara wanted to say, "Stay. Please don't go. I can't be alone again." Instead, she said, "Be careful. The snow is deep." A shadow of disappointment crossed his face. "I will be back in a few hours." Then he was gone, a lone figure swallowed by the white landscape. "He is coming back, right?" Clara turned to see Lily in the doorway, her small feet bare on the cold floor, her eyes wide with worry. "He is coming back," Clara said, her voice more certain than she felt. "He just went to find your horses." "Oh," Lily said, relaxing just a little. Clara knelt and took the little girl's hands. "Goodness, Lily, let's get you by the fire. Your feet are like ice." They huddled together under quilts as Clara poked the flames back to life. Lily leaned against her. "Easy as you please." "I don't want to go," the child said, her voice barely a whisper. "I like it here. It's small, but it feels safe." Clara's hand paused. "You have a real home, sweetheart. With your papa." Lily's voice got even smaller. "The big house is too big. Mama's things are still there. Her hairbrush. Everything. Sometimes I forget she's gone, and then it hurts all over again." Clara's heart gave a hitch. "That's just how grief is, honey. It sneaks up on you." "Does it ever stop?" the girl asked. "No," Clara said softly, pulling her closer. "But it gets quieter, like a storm moving off in the distance. You still hear the thunder, but it's not rattling your windows anymore." Lily looked up at her. "How long does that take?" Clara stared into the fire. "I'm still waiting on that part myself," she admitted. Lily's small hand found hers. "Maybe you need someone to wait with you." The words hit Clara square in the chest. Before she could answer, the door flew open. Nate stood there, covered in snow, breathing hard. His face was a mask of worry. "Found the horses," he said, "both of them." "That's good news." "And something else," he said, shutting the door against the wind. "Riders. About a mile out and heading this way." Clara's blood ran cold. "How many?" "3, maybe 4. They're moving fast, like they know right where they're going." Clara was already reaching for the rifle over the mantel. "Could be trappers." "Could be," Nate agreed. "Or it could be the trouble I brought with me." She met his gaze. "What kind of trouble?" His voice was bitter. "The kind that follows money. People who want what I have, who think a man with a young daughter is an easy mark." Clara's hands tightened on the gun. "Who?" "A woman named Beatrice Aldridge," he said, the name tasting like poison. "Her husband passed last year. She's been persistent." "How so?" "Trying to convince the whole town I'm not fit to raise Lily on my own." She says a child needs a mother, and she's more than willing to take on the burden. She wants your ranch, Clara stated plainly. She wants everything, and she's not above playing dirty to get it. Lily, who'd been quiet as a mouse, went pale. I don't like Mrs. Aldridge. Her smile is all wrong. Clara looked from the child back to Nate. You think she sent these riders? I don't know, but the timing's mighty suspicious. We were due back 3 days ago. If she told the sheriff we were missing, made it sound like I'd done something to Lily. A chill went through her. They'd be looking for you. Nate's face was grim. And if they find me here, with a woman they don't know, well, that story writes itself. You need to hide, Clara said, her mind made up. What? There's a root cellar under the floor, she said, already pulling back the old rug to show the trapdoor. Get in, both of you. Clara, I can't let you face them alone. You can, and you will, she said, her eyes flashing. If they're looking for trouble, let them find a lonely widow instead of the man they've been told to look for. But if they hurt you... They won't, she said, hefting the rifle. This ain't my first dance with unwelcome visitors. Nate still hesitated, but Lily tugged on his coat. Papa, Miss Clara knows what she's doing. He looked from his daughter to Clara, and finally gave a single sharp nod. If anything happens, the ranch is called Harlan's Ridge. 2 days' ride southwest. Find my foreman, Silas. He'll know what to do. Nate, nothing will happen, I promise. He held her gaze a moment longer, then lifted Lily and climbed down into the dark. Clara handed him a lantern and a blanket. Stay quiet, no matter what you hear. Clara, his voice came up from the shadows. Thank you. She shut the door before she could change her mind, put the rug back, and took a deep breath. The rifle felt solid and familiar in her hands. She moved to the window to wait. 20 minutes later, they appeared. 4 riders, just like Nate said. One man, who looked to be the leader, swung down from his horse. He was a big fella with a hard face and a deputy's badge pinned to his chest. Clara opened the door before he could knock. Afternoon, ma'am, he said, tipping his hat. But his eyes were already busy searching her cabin. Name's Deputy Silas Tucker. We're looking for a man and a little girl. Got a report they went missing. Clara kept her face like stone. Missing, you say? I've been snowed in for 3 days, Deputy. Haven't seen a soul. Tucker's eyes narrowed. You mind if we take a look around? I surely do mind, Clara said, not moving from the doorway. This is my land. I don't know you, and I don't take kindly to strangers wanting to barge into my home. You got a warrant? His jaw tightened. This is a rescue, ma'am, not a police matter. Then you won't mind moving on to look somewhere else, she said, her grip tight on the rifle she held just inside the door. I told you, I haven't seen anyone. Strange, a woman living all the way out here by herself, Tucker said, his eyes boring into hers. Not many folks mind their own business either, Clara shot back. And yet, here we are. The deputy's face turned red. For a second, she thought he'd push past her. His gaze dropped to the rifle. If you see them, he said finally, you send word to town. There's a lady real concerned about that little girl. I'm sure there is, Clara said, her voice dripping ice. He paused. Something you want to say, ma'am? Clara gave him a smile that didn't touch her eyes. I think you've said enough, Deputy. Safe travels. And she closed the door right in his face. She watched through the window as they argued, then finally rode off. An hour later, when she was sure they were gone for good, she opened the trap door. Nate climbed out, his face pale but furious. I heard every word, Beatrice. She actually did it. She's trying to take my daughter from me. Then we stop her, Clara said. Nate looked at her, surprised. We? The word had just come out. You saved our lives, he said. Your debt is paid. Maybe this ain't about a debt, Clara replied, the words hanging in the air between them. Lily's eyes darted between the two adults, a little smile on her face. "So, you're coming with us?" she asked. Clara looked at Nate. His face was dead serious, asking a question with his eyes he wouldn't say out loud. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "You can go back to your life." Clara looked around the small cabin. It had been her shelter, her protector, and her prison. "My life," she said softly. She thought of Lily's hand in hers, and the way Nate looked at her across the fire. "What if I don't want that life anymore?" Nate drew a sharp breath. "Clara," she held up a hand, "I'm not promising forever. But those men will be back. When they don't find you on the trail, they'll come back here. It's time I was moving on anyway." "Well then, come with us," Nate said, stepping closer. "Just until this whole business is settled. You can stay at the ranch. Silas will find you work, give you a room. When it is over, I will decide what is next." He nodded. "Fair enough." Lily squealed and hugged Clara's legs. "You're coming. You are really coming." Clara's hand landed in the child's soft hair. "Reckon I am," she whispered, wondering what in the world she was doing. She had no plan, just a rifle and a promise from two strangers who felt like home. It was likely the most foolish thing she had ever done. It was also the first time in 4 years she had truly felt alive. They left within the hour. Clara packed little because there was little to pack. Her rifle, her mother's Bible, and a quilt she could not bear to leave behind. She left the rest. The cabin was a cage, not a home. Nate's horse carried them both. Clara sat behind him, her arms at his waist, trying to ignore his warmth. Lily rode the other horse like she was born to it. 2 days to the ranch, Nate said. We will stay off the main roads. Let them watch. His voice was hard as iron. I am done with running. They rode through the deep snow under a clear sky, covering a good 15 miles by nightfall. They camped in a hollow, keeping the fire small. Lily was asleep in a heartbeat, curled up between them. Nate spoke quiet. You ought to get some rest. So should you. I cannot. The noise in my head is too loud. Clara understood. She just sat and waited. Beatrice showed up at the ranch about 6 months after my Margaret passed. He finally said she brought food, offered sympathies, and seemed decent enough. But then she started planting seeds, saying Lily needed a woman around, hinting that I could not handle it all by myself. At first I figured she was just trying to be helpful. Then I saw she was building a case against me, to take Lily. His voice went flat. She has connections. Half the town council owes her late husband a favor. If she can paint me as unfit, they will side with her. You are a good father. He stabbed at the fire. It does not matter what is true. It only matters what folks believe, and Beatrice is a master at making people believe her version of things. What is she really after? Clara asked. She cannot just take your child. There are laws. She wants to marry me. Nate's lip curled with distaste. That way she gets the land, the cattle, the whole operation. Since I will not agree, she aims to ruin me another way. By taking the only thing that matters. Clara's hands balled into fists. She remembered her own helplessness when the fever took her family. But this was not a sickness. This was a person, and a person could be fought. Then we fight, she said, her voice steady. Nate looked up, startled. I do not know how yet, Clara went on. But I know one thing for sure. That woman is not getting her hands on this little girl. Not while I'm still drawing breath. Something in Nate's face changed. Surprise, then a flicker of hope. You hardly know us. I know enough. Clara held his gaze across the fire. I know Lily lost her mama too young. And I know you are doing your best against impossible odds. I know you fixed my roof without me asking and hunted for us in a blizzard. She took a breath. And I know what it feels like to lose it all and have to keep on living. Anyone who would use a child to get what they want does not deserve to win. Why are you doing this? He asked after a long silence. For real? Clara looked at Lily, sleeping so soundly. She looked at this man who had crashed into her life like a Texas storm. Because 4 years ago I prayed to die, she said softly. For a whole year I begged God to take me too, but he did not. I thought he had forgotten me, but maybe, she paused, maybe he was just waiting for me to be ready. Ready for what? Nate asked. Clara could not say the words, but he nodded like he understood all the same. Get some sleep, he said. It is a long ride tomorrow. Clara lay down and pulled Lily close. The child mumbled and burrowed against her, trusting completely. For the first time in years, Clara did not dream of the dead. Morning was cold and bright. They ate dried meat and hardtack as they rode. Lily chattered on about the ranch foreman, a man named Silas. He is a little grumpy, she told Clara, but he makes mighty fine biscuits. Well, that is a useful skill. That is what Papa says. You will like him. Papa says what matters most is that he is loyal and true. Clara saw Nate scan the trees up ahead. Trouble? She asked. Not sure. He reined in his horse. I thought I saw something. They stopped and listened. The woods were dead quiet. Too quiet. Clara, Nate's voice was low. You take Lily and ride east. There is a town called Miller's Creek. I am not leaving you. If something happens, she has to get to safety. Nothing is going to happen. Clara, I said no. She pushed her horse up right beside his. We face this together. Before he could argue, 3 riders appeared from the woods. These were not deputies. These were hard men, the kind you hire for trouble. The man in the lead offered a smile full of brown teeth. Mr. Harlan, Ms. Aldridge sends her best. Nate's hand went to his rifle. I do not want trouble. Should not have made any then. The man's eyes drifted to Clara. Who is this? The new wife? That is none of your business. See, that is where you are wrong. Everything about you is Ms. Aldridge's business. She is worried. A little girl lost in a storm. Her daddy acting strange. Folks are starting to whisper. Let them. The man's smile got wider. The sheriff is real interested in having a chat with you. Wants to know where you have been and who you have been with. His eyes crawled over Clara again. I am sure it is all innocent, he drawled. But a pretty widow living all alone? Well, people will talk. Clara's blood ran hot. You got something to say? Say it plain. The man chuckled. This one has got some fire. Then you will love this. In one smooth motion, Clara raised her rifle. Ride out now, or I will put a bullet between your eyes. The man's smile vanished. His friends' hands drifted toward their guns. The air went tight. Easy now, the leader said. No need for that. Then leave. Can't do that. Ms. Aldridge is expecting us. Clara fired. The shot screamed past his ear, close enough to draw blood. The man's horse reared in panic. He clung to the saddle horn, his face pale with shock. That was a warning, Clara said, her voice calm as a frozen lake. The next one will not be. For a long moment, nobody breathed. Then the leader let out a sharp, surprised laugh. Well, I will be, he said, checking his bleeding ear. You are not just a pretty face after all. I am a widow who has buried everyone she ever loved. Clara's voice was pure ice. You think I am afraid of you? The men looked at each other. We will be seeing you again, the leader finally said. Ms. Aldridge does not give up. Neither do I. They turned their horses and vanished back into the trees. Clara held the rifle steady until the sound of hoofbeats was gone. Then her hands began to shake. Nate was right there, taking the rifle from her. Clara, look at me. She met his eyes and saw amazement and fear and something else. You could have been killed, he said. So could you. That is different. How? He did not answer, just stared at her like he was seeing her for the very first time. You shot at him, he finally said. I missed on purpose. By about half an inch. Her laugh was shaky. My Thomas taught me to shoot. He always said I had a good eye. Nate just shook his head slowly. Who in the world are you, Clara Thornton? I do not know anymore, she said, looking at her trembling hands. But I reckon I am about to find out. Lily, who had been quiet the whole time, nudged her horse forward. I knew it, she said, her face full of pride. I knew you were special. Clara just pulled the little girl into a one-armed hug. I am not special, sweet pea, just stubborn. That is what Papa says about the best horses, Lily smiled. The stubborn ones are worth keeping. Nate met Clara's eyes over his daughter's head, his own gaze saying everything. Worth keeping. They reached the ranch at sunset on the second day. Clara saw it from a ridge, a sprawling piece of land with a house built like a fort against the twilight sky. Smoke rose from 3 chimneys. Welcome to Harlan's Ridge, Nate said. Lily was already galloping ahead, hollering with joy. Silas! Silas! We are home! A tall, silver-haired man came out of the main house. He caught Lily as she leaped from her horse, swinging her around. Well, look what the cat dragged in, he said, his voice gruff but kind. You gave us a fright, little miss. We had an adventure, Silas. And we found Clara. She saved us from bad men, and she is going to stay with us forever. Clara felt her face grow warm. I did not exactly. Silas's sharp eyes landed on her, taking in her worn dress and the rifle she still held. So, he said, a slow smile cracking his weathered face. You are the one. The one? The one who finally got him to come on home. I am nobody, Clara finally said, standing dusty and bone-tired as ranch hands stared. Just someone who was in the right place. Silas studied her with sharp eyes. Right place, wrong time, and still managed to pull a rifle on 3 of Beatrice's men. He looked at Nate. Word gets around fast out here. Nate's face was grim. How bad is it? Bad enough. Beatrice has been telling folks all over town that you ran off with the child, that you might have done something to her. Silas's jaw was tight. She has half the women in town believing you have lost your mind with grief and that Lily is not safe with you. That is a lie, Clara said, her voice sharp. I saw that man hunt in a blizzard to feed his daughter. I saw him stay up all night to keep her safe. He is the best father I have ever seen. Silas's eyebrows shot up. You willing to say that to Judge Morrison? I will say it to God himself. A look of respect sparked in the old foreman's eyes. Well then, he nodded. Reckon we have got ourselves a fight. The ranch house was grander than anything Clara had ever seen, with high ceilings and polished wood. She felt small and out of place. This way, ma'am. A kind-faced woman in an apron appeared. Mr. Harlan asked me to show you to your room. You need rest. I am Martha. Clara was too tired to argue and followed her up the sweeping staircase. The room was bigger than her whole cabin, with a real bed and curtains on the windows. I brought up hot water, Martha said. You will find clean clothes in the wardrobe. They were Mrs. Harlan's. Mr. Nate said you might be her size. I cannot wear a dead woman's clothes, Clara whispered. They are just clothes now, Martha said softly. She would have wanted them used. Alone, Clara stood in the huge room and wondered what she was doing there. This was not her world. These were not her people. A soft knock came at her door. It was Lily, her voice small. Can I come in? The child stood there, all cleaned up for bed. Just wanted to say good night, Lily mumbled, shuffling her feet, and to make sure you were still here. I am here. Promise you will not leave? Lily's eyes were wide. Promise you will stay. Clara knelt, taking the girl's small hands in her own. I do not know about forever, sweetheart. Please stay forever, Lily whispered, her grip tightening. Mama said she would stay forever, but she did not. Clara just pulled the little girl into a hug, holding her tight. I know, baby, I know. She stayed with Lily until the girl was sound asleep. When Clara finally stepped out, Nate was waiting in the hall. Thank you, he said, his voice low, for being so good to her. She makes it easy. She is just terrified of losing folks. Nate looked like he was carrying the weight of the world. After her mama passed, she had nightmares for months. I did not know what to do. You were there. That is what mattered. Was it? His laugh was harsh. Sometimes I think she would be better off if do not. Clara's voice was sharp. Do not you dare even think it. Nate just stared at her. That little girl thinks you hung the moon, Clara said, her voice full of fire. You are her whole world, her safe place, her home. She poked a finger into his chest. And if you believe for 1 second that some money-grubbing woman could be better for her, then you are not the man I took you for. Nate caught her hand, his touch surprisingly gentle. What man do you take me for, Clara? The question hit her like a punch. Because, he said softly, I think you might see a man I forgot how to be. Clara pulled her hand back, her face hot. Get some rest, she muttered. We have a fight ahead of us. She shut the door before he could say another word. The next morning brought trouble right to their doorstep. Clara heard shouting and hurried downstairs. Nate was on the porch with a man in a city suit. The man's voice was slick as oil. Mr. Harland, Mrs. Aldridge just wants what is best for the child. What is best is for her to be with me, her father. The court may not agree, seeing as you vanished for 3 days. It was a blizzard. I was keeping my daughter from freezing to death. Clara stepped out onto the porch right then. The lawyer's eyes landed on her. And who is this? None of your concern, Nate growled. Oh, but it is, the man said with a cold smile. The petition mentions concerns about unsuitable company in Lily's life. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. I beg your pardon? A mysterious woman all alone out here, taking in a man and his child for days. You can guess how a judge might see that. Nate took a step forward. You watch your mouth. I am just stating facts that will come up in court, the lawyer said smoothly. Unless we solve this quietly. What do you want? The man pulled out a paper. Mrs. Aldridge proposes a marriage. She becomes Lily's stepmother, you keep control of your ranch, and this all goes away. Get off my land, Nate said, his voice deadly calm. You have until Friday, the lawyer said, tipping his hat. Think about what you stand to lose. As he rode off, Clara's hands were shaking with fury. She will not stop, she said. No, Nate's voice was empty. She will not. Then we have to stop her. Nate looked at her. What are you talking about? Clara took a deep breath. The idea was pure madness. But she thought of Lily. She wants you married, Clara said. She wants a mother for Lily. I will never marry Beatrice. I know. Clara looked him straight in the eye. Marry me. Nate just stared, his face a storm of confusion and shock. Clara, just listen, she said. It would be on paper only. Just to satisfy the court and show you have a stable home for Lily. Then Beatrice has no power over you. And you? What do you get from this? A place to belong, the words tumbled out, raw and honest. I have been alone for 4 years, Nate. I am tired of just surviving. I want to live. He was quiet for a long time. You deserve more than that. So do you, she said with a shaky laugh. But this is where we are. I will not let that woman take your daughter. Nate moved closer to her, close enough she could see the gray in his eyes. You would tie yourself to a man you hardly know? Give up your freedom? What freedom, Clara asked. The freedom to starve alone in a cabin? That is not freedom, Nate. It is a slow surrender. Something changed in his eyes. My wife, Margaret. His voice was thick with emotion. Before she passed, she made me promise. She said Lily deserved a whole family, not just a father. She made me promise I would not close my heart forever. Clara's own heart was pounding. I never thought I could, Nate went on. Then you opened your door in that storm. He gently touched her face. You give everything and ask for nothing in return. Nate, I do not want a marriage of convenience, Clara, he said softly. If we do this, I want it to be real. You barely know me. I know enough. He smiled, and it changed his whole face. I know you are stubborn and brave. I know my daughter already loves you, and me." He paused. "I am getting there." She covered his hand with hers. "Is that a yes?" "It is a yes," he whispered, resting his forehead against hers. "It is a yes." The news hit the ranch like a summer storm. By evening, the whole valley was talking. That night, Lily was bouncing on her bed, her face shining with joy. "I knew it. I knew you were meant to stay forever. Now, hold on," Clara laughed. "Your papa and I have not worked anything out, but you are marrying him," Lily said. "That means you will be my mama." Clara's breath caught. "Lily, not like your real mama." The little girl's face was serious. "I know she is in heaven and is special, but you can be my other mama, the one who is here." The simple truth in her words was all that mattered. Lily wrapped her arms around Clara. "I love you," she whispered. "Loved you since you pulled me from that snow." Clara held her heart aching with a feeling she thought was gone forever. "I love you too." Nate stood in the doorway, his gaze stopping her breath. "Time for sleep, little one." Lily snuggled down. "Will you all tuck me in like a real family?" A silent agreement passed between them as they tucked her in. Nate then spun a tale of a brave woman who tamed the wild. Later, Clara whispered, "That's not me." "It's exactly who you are," Nate said. Their wedding was just 3 days away. The next 3 days, Clara learned the ranch while dodging Beatrice Aldridge's moves. A letter on Wednesday threatened to expose her past. "What past?" Clara asked. "I was a farmer's wife for 12 years. Nate's jaw tightened. "She'll invent one." Thursday, the sheriff came asking questions. Silas stepped onto the porch, shotgun in hand. "I vouch for her. Known her 5 days, and she has more integrity than this whole county." The sheriff left, empty-handed. Friday, Beatrice herself arrived, descending from an expensive carriage like a queen in her mid-40s. Coldly beautiful, her smile never reached her eyes. Clara went down to meet Nate in the foyer. Nate's posture was rigid. "Mrs. Aldridge, you were not invited." Her voice was like cold honey. "I am here to save a child from your mistake." "This... nobody?" "My choices are my own," Nate bit out. "They affect that poor girl." Beatrice's eyes found Lily on the stairs. "Hello, darling." Lily's young face hardened. "I do not like you," she said clearly. "You make Papa sad. Go away." Beatrice's smile froze. Clara stepped forward. "My stepdaughter asked you to leave." "She is not your stepdaughter," Beatrice snapped. "Not if I have anything to say about it." "Good thing you do not." They faced off, Clara plain, Beatrice glittering. "This world will break you," she hissed. "The only thing you will be picking up," Clara's voice was steady, "is your pride off the floor. I have survived things you cannot imagine. I buried a husband and a child and rebuilt my life from nothing. I am not afraid of you." Uncertainty flickered in Beatrice's eyes. "This is not over," she said. "Yes, it is." Nate stepped beside Clara, taking her hand. "Leave my home, Beatrice." Beatrice looked at their joined hands, at Lily glaring from the stairs, and knew she could not break them. "You will regret this," she said, then swept out the door. The sound of her carriage faded. Clara's knees went weak, but Nate held her elbow. "Are you all right?" "Fine." She took a shaky breath. Lily thundered down the stairs and hugged them both. "You were so brave," she told Clara. "I was terrified," Clara admitted. Lily's eyes shone. "That is what brave means." The wedding took place at sunset on Saturday, with the ranch hands gathered as witnesses. When it was time for vows, Nate turned to her. "I am not one for pretty words," he said quietly, "but I promise to work every day to be worthy of you and to protect you." Clara's eyes burned. I cannot promise perfection, she answered. But I promise to stay, to fight for this family and to love your daughter as my own. She paused. And to learn to love you, if you will let me. His smile was everything. All the time in the world. The preacher pronounced them married. Nate kissed her, gentle and full of questions. Lily launched herself at Clara with a joyful cry. Mama. Clara held her, and her own tears finally fell. That night on the porch, Nate asked, "Second thoughts?" "Hundreds," Clara laughed softly. "But none of them matter." He took her hand. "I meant what I said about learning to love you." Clara's voice was quiet. "I am not there yet. There is still Margaret and Thomas." "I know." Nate's voice was gentle. "We have both got ghosts. But I want to try. For us." He lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles. "Then we try," he said. "Together." They stood there, two wounded people choosing hope over fear. Inside, their daughter slept. Outside, the night was wide and full of possibilities. Clara thought of her empty cabin and felt no longing for it. "It is getting cold," Nate said. "We should go in." "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For getting lost in my woods." He laughed, warm and surprised. "Thank you for opening the door." For the first time in 4 years, Clara believed in tomorrow. They got 2 weeks of peace, and Clara almost believed the fight was over. She fell into the rhythm of the ranch, learning the hands and the horses. Nate was patient, kind. He was courting his own wife, a thought that made her smile. Then Friday came. She was in the garden with Lily when a rider came in a cloud of dust, his horse wild-eyed. "Mrs. Harland," he yelled, pulling up hard. "You need to come quick. It is Mr. Nate." Her blood ran cold. "What happened?" "An accident. South pasture. His horse threw him." The rider swallowed hard. "He's hurt bad, ma'am. Real bad." Lily's small fingers crushed Clara's hand. "Papa!" Without thinking, Clara scooped Lily into her arms and ran. "Silas," she yelled, "get the wagon ready." The foreman met her halfway, his face grim. He saw the look on the rider's face and knew. "You go on," he told Clara. "I'll fetch the doctor." Clara spurred her horse harder than she ever had, Lily clinging to her back. It was 3 miles of frozen, unforgiving land. A prayer was stuck in her throat. "Please, not another one. I can't bury another one." She saw the ranch hands first, standing in a quiet circle with their hats in their hands. She jumped off the horse before it even stopped. "Let me through." They made a path. Nate was on the ground, his skin a pale gray. His leg was bent at an angle that made her sick. Blood stained his pants. "Nate," she whispered, dropping to her knees. "Can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, filled with pain. "Clara," he rasped. "Lily? She's safe, right here." Clara took his hand. It was ice cold. "What happened?" "Horse got spooked," he mumbled. Stupid snake. Don't talk. Just save your strength." "Clara," he gripped her hand tighter. "Listen, if I don't—" "Stop." "I said stop it." Clara's voice broke. "You are not dying. Not after I survived everything else just to lose you to some spooked horse." A flicker of a smile crossed his face. "Bossy," he whispered. "You're damn right." Clara turned to the nearest man. "How long for the doctor?" "An hour, maybe more." That was too long. The patch of red on his leg was growing. "Get me rope," she commanded. "Clean rags and whiskey, too. And I need someone to hold him down." The men jumped to it. Clara pushed aside the memory of her first husband, Thomas, slipping away. This was different. This was a wound she could see, a problem she could fight. She tied her belt above the wound, poured whiskey to clean it out, and set the bone with a sickening crack. Nate bit down hard on a piece of leather but never made a sound. By the time Dr. Webb arrived, the bleeding had stopped. "Who did this?" the doctor asked, his eyes wide as he looked at her work. "This is remarkable." "Will he live?" Clara asked, her voice steady. "Because of this tourniquet, yes. The bone is set clean, too." The doctor looked at her with a newfound respect. "You saved his life, Mrs. Harland." Clara's legs finally buckled. She sank to the frozen ground as the men loaded Nate onto the wagon. Lily crawled into her lap, crying, but Clara couldn't shed a tear. If she started, she knew she would never stop. They brought Nate home at sunset, but she never left his bedside. She was still there, holding his hand when he woke up around midnight. "Clara," he said, his voice weak. "Where else would I be?" He managed a small smile. I thought I was a goner." "Not on my watch," she said. His fingers tightened on hers. "All I could think of was you and Lily. About leaving you alone." "You're not leaving us," she said, her throat tight. "I know," he breathed. "You wouldn't let me. The doctor says you'll be laid up for a good long while. Months, maybe. That bone was a bad break." "Then you'll have to run things," Nate said, his eyes clear and serious. "The ranch, the men, everything." "What?" "I don't know the first thing about running a ranch." "You'll learn," he said, his belief in her absolute. "You learned how to survive in the wild. You can do this. I trust you, Clara." He kissed her knuckles. This man, who had turned her whole world around, believed in her more than she did. "All right," she said softly. "I'll try." She went downstairs at dawn to face the ranch hands. She could feel them sizing her up as she walked to the head of the table. A woman giving them orders. "I know what you're thinking," she started, her voice firm. "I'm new to this. I've only been married to your boss for 2 weeks." A few men shuffled their feet. "But here is what I do know," Clara said, her voice like steel. "I know how to work, and I know how to hold things together when they're falling apart. Mr. Harlan trusts me, and that's what matters." She looked each man in the eye. "So, we can do this the hard way, or we can do it the smart way. You teach me what I need to know, and I'll work harder than any of you to see this ranch through." The room was dead silent. Then Silas stood up. "You heard the lady," he said gruffly, and started giving out orders. The men moved, a little slow at first, but they moved. Clara let out a long breath. "Thank you," she said to Silas. "Don't thank me yet," the old foreman warned. "That was the easy part. They'll test you. Show any weakness, and they'll eat you alive." "Then I won't," she promised, and he just smiled. "No," he said. "I don't reckon you will." The testing began right away. A man named Dawkins questioned her about moving cattle, but Clara stood her ground. She explained that a freeze was coming, and she was right. The next morning, the upper pastures were solid ice. Dawkins kept his mouth shut after that. A fence broke, and instead of sending men, she rode out and fixed it with them, earning blisters and their respect. Day by day, she earned her place. Every night she told Nate about her small victories and her fears. "You're doing better than I did my first year," he told her 3 weeks later. "I'm scared all the time," she admitted. "It doesn't show," he said, pulling her close. "You're remarkable, Clara." "I'm stubborn," she corrected. "Not much difference, is there?" He laughed. For a moment it felt like they could handle anything. That was when Beatrice Aldridge made her move. It started as whispers in town, tales about the new wife who was running the ranch into the ground. "It's all lies," her housekeeper Martha told her. "The folks here know better." But the folks in town didn't. The rumors got meaner. They twisted the truth of her past, saying she had poisoned her first husband for his farm and had come here looking for her next rich victim. It came to a head when a supply merchant refused her business. "I don't serve murderers," he spat, and slammed the door in her face. She rode home, her face burning with shame and fury. Nate was waiting on the porch, getting around on crutches. He took one look at her face and knew. What happened? She walked right past him into the house. He followed her inside. Clara, talk to me. They are saying I killed Thomas, she said, her voice flat. That I poisoned him, and that I came here to... She choked on the words. Nate's face went from white to a deep, furious red she had never seen before. Who? He said, his voice dangerously low. Who is saying this? Everyone, she whispered, sinking into a chair. Wait, it's all over town. Which merchant? It does not matter. It matters to me. Nate's voice was like iron. Give me his name. And you will do what? Go over there on one bad leg to defend my honor? Clara laughed without humor. This is Beatrice's work. She is trying to ruin me. Then we fight back. How? I cannot prove I did not kill my husband. Nate sat down across from her, his face tight with pain. You have witnesses, he said. People from Missouri who saw Thomas die of a fever. That is hundreds of miles away. We will reach them, Nate insisted. We will write letters and gather statements. We will build a case so strong her lies fall apart. That could take months. Then it takes months. His hand covered hers. I am not letting her win, Clara. He was ready to go to war for her. Why? She whispered. Why do you keep fighting for me? His answer was quiet and simple. Because I love you. Clara forgot how to breathe. You do not have to say it back, Nate said gently. I just needed you to know. You are not alone, and you will never be again. She just stared at him. This man who had stumbled into her cabin during a blizzard. He had seen her at her lowest, her absolute worst, and still he chose her. Her voice caught in her throat. He just smiled softly. It is all right. Take your time. But something deep inside her had shifted. She looked at him and saw something new, something that felt both terrifying and wonderful, and so very right. She leaned forward and gave him a kiss that said everything her words could not. He pulled her closer, his hands in her hair. The world faded away until it was just the two of them. When they finally pulled apart, breathing hard, she realized tears were streaming down her face. I think, she managed to say, I think I might love you too. Nate's smile was like the sun coming up after a long, hard winter. Good. Do not make me say it again, she laughed. I would not dream of it. For the first time in 4 long years, she felt a flicker of real hope. An hour later, Lily found them holding hands. Does this mean you are heart married now? Not just paper married? Clara and Nate shared a look. Yeah, sweetheart, he said. I reckon it does. Good, Lily beamed, because I told everyone at church you were the best mama in the whole world. Then her face darkened. That mean lady, Mrs. Aldridge, was there. She said bad things about you, that you came from nothing and would go back to nothing. Lily stuck her chin out. So I told her she was wrong. I said my real mama would have loved you. A quiet stillness fell over the room. Nate's hand found Clara's shoulder, his grip firm. And what did Mrs. Aldridge do then? Clara asked. She got real mad, Lily grinned. Her face turned red as a tomato, and she just walked away. A fierce pride rose up in Clara's chest. It felt like fire. You are right, she said, hugging Lily tight. Your real mama would have loved me because she raised the most wonderful child in the world. The letters went out the next week. She wrote to folks back in Missouri and to Thomas's younger sister Rachel in Kansas. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived. Clara's hands shook as she read it. Dear Clara, it said, I cried when I read your words. All these years, I thought you blamed me. Now I find out you have been suffering all alone, accused of terrible things. Well, I will not stand for it. I am coming to Colorado. I will tell anyone who will listen that my brother died of a fever, that you nursed him until your own hands were raw, that you loved him more than anything. I will be there by the end of the month. Your sister, Rachel. Clara read the words again and again through her tears. Good news? Silas asked. The best, Clara said, wiping her eyes. We are going to win. A week later, Beatrice Aldridge marched into the ranch yard with the sheriff and a judge right behind her. Clara and Nate met them on the porch. Mrs. Harlan, Beatrice said with a poisonous smile, I am here to offer you a kindness. Confess now, and I will ask the court for mercy. Confess to what? Clara asked. To the murder of your first husband. To fraud. The good people of this town deserve to know the truth about you. Clara stood tall. The good people of this town, she said calmly, are about to find out exactly what kind of woman I am. She nodded, and from inside the house, Rachel appeared. But Rachel was not alone. Behind her was the doctor who treated Thomas, the pastor from his funeral, and a dozen other neighbors from Missouri. They had all been arriving for days, waiting for this very moment. These people have come a long way, Clara said. They have proof my husband died from a fever, and that I loved him. And they have something else, something you cannot fight. What is that? Beatrice asked, her face turning pale. The truth. Rachel stepped forward. My name is Rachel Thornan. Thomas was my brother. I watched him die of typhoid fever, and I watched his wife nearly kill herself trying to save him. Anyone who says different is a liar. One by one, the others spoke. They painted a picture of a devoted wife and a woman with unshakable integrity. When they finished, the silence was heavy. The judge cleared his throat. Mrs. Aldridge, he said, it seems your accusations are baseless. They are lying, Beatrice shrieked. She must have paid them. I have heard enough, the judge said sharply. This matter is closed. As the men turned to leave, Clara walked slowly toward Beatrice. You tried to take everything from me, she said quietly. My name, my family, my home. You do not belong here, Beatrice sneered. Maybe not, Clara said, leaning closer, but I am here, and I am staying, and there is not a single thing you can do about it. She turned her back and walked to Nate's side. Ready to go inside? He asked. Clara looked at her house, at the friends who had crossed states for her, and at Lily, who was grinning from the window. Yeah, she said. I am ready. That night, the ranch had a celebration. Martha cooked a feast, and the ranch hands played fiddles and guitars. Rachel danced with Silas, and Lily twirled between Clara and Nate until she was too tired to stand. I need some air, Clara said, handing the sleeping child to Nate. She stepped out onto the porch, under a sky filled with stars. Rachel joined her a moment later. Thomas would be happy seeing you like this, she said. You think so? Clara asked. I know so. He always said you were too strong to let grief waste you. Looks like he was right. I wasted 4 years, Clara said. You survived 4 years, Rachel corrected her gently. That is not the same thing. Thank you, Clara said, for coming, for everything. Family fights for family, Rachel smiled. That is what Thomas always said. When Clara went back inside, Nate was waiting by the fire with Lily asleep in his arms. Everything all right? He asked. Clara looked at her husband, her daughter, and the home she had fought so hard to keep. Everything, she said, is finally perfect. Everything is perfect, she said, and for the first time she truly meant it. Spring arrived early that year, melting the ice and bringing green shoots from the frozen ground. The world was waking up, and so was she. 3 months had passed since they had won against Beatrice. 3 months of healing. Rachel, who had stayed all winter and filled the house with laughter, now stood on the porch with her bags packed. You do not have to go, Clara said again. Yes, I do. Rachel smiled. Y'all do not need me anymore. You are a family now. Clara hugged her tightly. You are our family too. Always. I know, Rachel said, her voice thick with emotion. That is why I can leave. Lily ran from the barn, her face streaked with tears. Do not go, Aunt Rachel. Rachel knelt and hugged the child close. I will be back every summer, sweetheart. That is a promise. You promise? Cross my heart, Rachel said, smiling through her own tears. Just a regular promise. A cross-my-heart promise. Heart. Rachel kissed her forehead. And besides, someone has to bring you those birthday gifts in person. You cannot trust the mail with something that important. Lily let out a little laugh through her tears. I want a music box, the kind with the little dancing lady. Well then, a music box is exactly what you are going to get. Soon the stagecoach rumbled up the road. Clara helped Rachel with her bags, gave her one last hug, and then watched that coach fade into the horizon. When she finally turned around, Nate was standing right there in the doorway. He had quit using that crutch last week. His leg still gave him trouble when the weather turned cold, and it probably always would, but he walked with just a tiny limp. The town doctor called it a miracle. Clara just called it pure stubbornness. "Are you doing all right?" he asked her. "Yeah." She walked up the porch steps and he pulled her into a hug, just saying a final goodbye to the past and a big hello to the future. She gave him a soft kiss, something just like that. After Rachel left, life found its own steady rhythm. Clara truly learned how to run that ranch, not just getting by, but really understanding it all. She learned which ranch hands she could count on and which ones needed a watchful eye. She figured out when to push hard and when to ease up. She came to know that land like the back of her own hand. The folks in town started coming around, but it took some time. First, it was just one or two store owners who would do business with her, then a few more. Before long, the ladies at the church stopped their whispering when she came through the door. It helped that she never put on airs or tried to be someone she was not. Clara Harlan never wasted a minute pretending to be someone she was not. She came from nothing and wore that truth like a badge of honor. Her foreman, Silas, appeared at her office door with his hat in his hands. "Ma'am," he said, "there is a visitor for you in the front room." Clara was not expecting anyone. In the parlor, a young woman stood by the fire, looking no older than 25 and worn down by the road. She clutched a small bag as if it held her entire world. "Mrs. Harlan," the woman began, her voice shaking. "My name is Sarah Miller. I heard about you, and I had nowhere else to turn." Clara looked closer and saw the ugly bruise peeking from Sarah's collar, and how she jumped when a door slammed elsewhere in the house. "Who hurt you?" Clara asked softly. That was all it took. Sarah broke down, tears streaming. "My husband," she cried. "I left once before. He found me and said the next time he would make sure I did not get up." "Where is he now?" Clara asked, her voice steady. "Back in Denver. I left before dawn." Sarah wiped at her tears. "I am sorry. I should not have come here." Clara gently took her hands. "Hush now. You came to exactly the right place." When Nate found Clara an hour later, she was settling Sarah into a guest room. "Who is our new guest?" he asked quietly. "Someone who needed a safe place to land," Clara said, closing the door behind her. "Her husband is the cause." Nate's jaw tightened into a hard line. "He will come looking for her." Clara met his gaze. "And when he does, we will deal with him." A silent understanding passed between them. "All right," Nate agreed. "We will deal with him." Word travels fast in the West. Within a month, 2 more women arrived, then 3 more. They came from big cities and small towns, some with children, all with scars you could see and scars you could not. Clara welcomed every last one. "You are running a refuge," Silas noted one evening. "I am helping people," she answered. But she knew he was right. Without planning it, she had built a sanctuary. "We are going to need more space if this keeps up," Clara said one day. "Already thought of that," Silas replied, handing her a piece of paper. It showed plans for a new building with its own kitchen and proper sleeping quarters. "When did you find time for this?" she asked, surprised. Silas almost smiled. "A man gets tired of just looking at cattle. Besides, what you are doing here is right." "That will take money," Clara said as Nate walked up behind them. "It is your money," she told him. "No," Nate said, putting his arm around her. "It is our money, and I cannot think of a better way to spend it." Summer arrived and brought a different kind of trouble. The new building was half complete when a rider galloped toward them, kicking up a cloud of dust. Clara's hand went straight to the pistol on her hip. "Easy," Nate said, standing beside her. "He is just a messenger." The man pulled his horse to a stop, his face pale. "Mrs. Harlan. Mr. Harlan," he said, out of breath. He swallowed hard. "Judge Morrison sent me. There is a custody petition." Clara's blood ran cold. "Beatrice?" she asked. But the man shook his head. "No, ma'am. It is for the child, Lily. Her grandmother, Margaret's mother, has come from Boston. She is claiming Lily should be with real family." The words hit like a physical blow. Nate's face turned to stone. "When is the hearing?" he asked, his voice strained. "This Friday. In 3 days." The rider handed them the papers and rode off, leaving them in a state of shock. Clara read the name with trembling hands. Eleanor Whitmore, a wealthy Boston widow who had never once visited her granddaughter. "I did not even know she was still alive," Nate said numbly. "Margaret said they had a falling out years ago." Why would she do this now? Clara wondered aloud. "The ranch," Nate answered, his voice bitter. "Word of our good fortune must have reached her. If she gains control of Lily, she gains control of this entire ranch." "So what do we do?" Clara asked. Nate's voice was cold and steady. "We fight." Eleanor Whitmore arrived the next day, stepping from a private carriage like a queen. Her face looked like it was carved from ice. She swept into the house uninvited. "I assume you are the new wife," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "And I assume you are the grandmother who never bothered to meet her grandchild," Clara replied, just as cold. 7 years with no letters, no visits, and now you want custody?" A brief flash of surprise crossed Eleanor's face. "I was respecting my daughter's wishes." "This is not about your daughter's wishes. This is about Lily's life," Clara said, stepping closer. "She is happy and loved here. You cannot just appear and rip her away." "I am her grandmother." "And I," Clara said, her voice clear and strong, "am her mother." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "You are nothing but a stranger who married into this family." "I am the woman who tucks her in at night and chases away her nightmares," Clara shot back, her voice shaking with fury. "Where were you, Mrs. Whitmore, when Margaret died? Where were you when a 6-year-old girl cried herself to sleep every night for a year?" For a split second, Eleanor's composure faltered. "I was not allowed to visit." "You could have fought for her," Clara insisted. "But you stayed in your fancy Boston house and pretended she did not exist. You abandoned her, and I will not let you take her from the only home she has ever known." Eleanor's cold mask snapped back into place. "We will see what the court has to say about that." With that, she turned and swept out of the house. A few minutes later, Lily found Clara standing alone. "Mama?" she asked in a small voice. "Who was that lady?" Clara pulled her into a tight hug. "Nobody important, sweetheart. She was just angry, but it is not your problem." She hoped with all her heart that she was not lying. That night, Clara could not sleep. She sat by Lily's bed, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest. This little girl had walked into her life during a blizzard and had become her whole world. Nate found her in the dark. "I figured I would find you here," he said softly. "I cannot lose her, Nate," Clara whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You will not," he promised, kneeling beside her chair. "Look at me." His eyes were as steady as the mountains. "You are the strongest person I have ever known. You built a life from nothing. You turned this ranch into a safe harbor. You gave that little girl a reason to believe in happy endings." He took her hands in his. "Eleanor Whitmore does not stand a chance against you." "But what if the court decides against us?" "Then we appeal," Nate said, his grip tightening. "We will keep fighting. But I have a feeling it will not come to that. Judge Morrison has known me since I was a boy. He has seen Lily grow up on this ranch. Up. He knows the kind of man I am, and he knows the kind of mother you are. This whole town knows it now. Nate gave her a small smile. You have got half the county ready to speak for you. And that includes some people who were not exactly your biggest fans before. Clara thought about the store owners who once turned her away, and the church ladies who used to whisper behind their hands. She wondered how many of them had a change of heart after the refuge opened, after the stories started spreading about the woman who took in anyone lost and broken, without ever asking for a thing in return. It might not be enough, she worried. It will be, Nate said, kissing her forehead. Just have a little faith. Faith. It was such a simple word, but it was a terrifying thing to actually feel. But as she looked down at Lily's peaceful, sleeping face, Clara knew she did not have any other choice. The hearing was held in a courtroom so full you could not find an empty seat. Clara sat at the defendant's table with Nate right beside her. Lily was on her other side, squeezing her hand so tight it started to hurt. Across the aisle sat Eleanor Whitmore, with a couple of high-priced lawyers on either side of her. Her face looked like it was carved from stone. Judge Morrison finally took his seat. He was an older fellow with white hair and sharp eyes. He had the look of a man who had seen enough of people to know when they were putting on a show. "This court will come to order," he said, and banged his gavel. "We are here today to decide the custody of the child, Lily Grace Harlan. Mrs. Whitmore, you are the one who filed the petition, claiming the girl would be better off in your care. You may present your case." Eleanor's lawyer got to his feet. He was a slick fellow, all polished and smooth. He painted this picture of a poor, grieving grandmother who was kept from her only grandchild. He spoke of a father who had cut off all ties. He described a child being raised out in the middle of nowhere, kept from her proper heritage, her mother's memory, and her rightful spot in Boston society. "Mrs. Whitmore is ready to give Lily every possible advantage," the lawyer finished. "The best schools, the finest company, and a life that honors her mother's legacy." Judge Morrison then turned to Nate. "Mr. Harlan, what is your response?" Nate stood up. He was not a lawyer. He did not have the fancy words or the training, but he had something much better. "The truth, Your Honor. I love my wife. I loved her more than I can ever say. When she passed, I did not think I would ever get over it. But I had a little girl who needed me, so I did what any father would do. I just kept on going." He shot a look at Eleanor. "My wife never, not once, spoke about her mother. Not in 7 whole years of marriage. I did not even know Mrs. Whitmore was still alive until just 3 days ago. Whatever went on between them, Margaret made her choice. She wanted Lily raised right here on this land with this family. That family now includes a complete stranger," Eleanor's lawyer cut in. "A woman with no proper background, no education, and no connection to this child." "That woman," Nate said in a quiet, steady voice, "is the only reason my daughter smiles again." The courtroom went silent. Judge Morrison leaned forward. "Please continue." "After Margaret died, Lily did not speak a word for 3 months. She would not eat, she would not sleep. I tried everything I could think of. I took her to doctors. I tried medicines. I even prayed. Nothing seemed to work." Nate's voice cracked just a little. "Then Clara came into our lives. In less than a week, my little girl was laughing again. In a month, she was calling Clara her mama. He looked right at Clara, and his eyes were filled with love and thanks and a whole lot of fight. Clara Harlan is no stranger. She is the woman who saved my family. She is the one Lily runs to when she gets scared. She is the one who stays up with her all night long when the nightmares come. She is not perfect, and she would be the first to tell you so. But she loves my daughter with every single thing she has." He then turned to Eleanor. "Can you say the same, Mrs. Whitmore?" Eleanor's face just got tighter. She did not say a word. Judge Morrison looked over at Clara. "Mrs. Harlan, this court would like to hear from you now." Clara got to her feet, though her legs were shaking. "I am not going to stand here and pretend I belong in that world," she said. "I grew up with nothing. And I lost my first husband and my baby to a fever. I spent 4 long years all by myself in a cabin just trying to stay alive. I do not know which fork you are supposed to use at a fancy dinner. I cannot play the piano or speak French or do any of those things that Boston society thinks are so important. She took a deep breath. But I do know how to love. I know how to stand up and fight for people who cannot fight for themselves. And her voice broke for a second. I know what it means to choose somebody. Not because you are supposed to, but because they have become your entire world. She looked over at Lily, who was watching her with big, worried eyes. Lily may not have come from my body, but she grew right here in my soul. Every story I read her at bedtime, every scraped knee I cleaned and bandaged, every bad dream I chased away. She is my daughter, in every single way that counts. Clara turned back to the judge. I am not perfect. I know I will make mistakes, but I promise you I will never, ever walk away from her. And with all due respect to Mrs. Whitmore, I cannot say the same for a grandmother who was gone for 7 years and only came back when she heard there was money. Eleanor's lawyer jumped up from his chair. That is just speculation. Sit down, Judge Morrison said with a sharp voice. He looked at Clara for a long, hard moment. The child, he finally said. I would like to hear from the child. Lily looked at Clara and then at Nate. They both gave her a little nod. She stood up, looking so small but so brave, and she faced the judge. Lily, Judge Morrison said in a gentle voice, do you understand what is going on here today? Yes, sir. That lady wants to take me away from my home. And how does that make you feel? Lily's little chin lifted. Clara knew that look. It was pure, stubborn determination. I do not want to go. Her voice was clear and strong in the quiet courtroom. This is my home. Papa is my papa, and Clara is my mama. I have my own room with all my things and a horse named Buttercup, and I have friends at school. She paused for a moment, and her eyes started to fill with tears. My real mama is in heaven, she said, her voice a little softer now. I miss her every single day. But right before she died, she told me something. She told me to be brave, and to let other people love me, and not to be afraid of a new family. Lily looked right at Clara. Clara is my new family. She loves me. I know she does because she shows me every single day, not with fancy gifts or talk about fancy schools, but just by being there, by staying. She wiped at her eyes with her sleeve. Please, sir, do not make me leave. The entire courtroom was still. Judge Morrison cleared his throat, and when he finally spoke, his voice was a little rough. I have seen my share of custody battles in this courtroom. I have seen parents fight over their children like they were property. I have seen money passed around, and I've heard lawyers spin all kinds of tall tales. He paused. This is not one of those cases. He looked directly at Eleanor. Mrs. Whitmore, I have no doubt that you believe you are doing what is best for your granddaughter. But this child already has a home. She has a family. She has 2 parents who clearly love her more than anything. To pull her out of that now for any reason would cause harm that could never be fixed. Eleanor's face turned pale. Furthermore, the judge went on, I find it very troubling that you made no effort to see this family for 7 years. Not one letter, not one visit, and no legal action until money was involved. Factor. His gaze turned to steel. I am not accusing you of anything, ma'am, but I am making a note of it. He struck the gavel down hard. Petition denied. Lily Grace Harland will stay with her father and stepmother. This court is adjourned. The room exploded with noise, but Clara could not hear it. She was holding Lily, who had thrown herself into her mother's arms. Mama, we won, she cried. We really won. Clara hugged her daughter close, the tears finally coming. They had won. They were going home. The journey back to the ranch was like a sweet dream. Lily talked the entire way, a happy stream of words about school, her horse, and what she wanted for supper. Clara let the sound fill the empty spaces fear had left behind. As they neared home, Nate took her hand. You know, he said softly, I believe I fall in love with you more each day. Clara looked at the man who had saved her, the man who gave her a family. Are you just now figuring that out? He laughed, a real deep laugh that made Lily giggle. I have known it since you aimed a rifle at 3 men and did not even blink. I just keep getting reminded. Clara squeezed his hand back. Good. I plan to keep reminding you for the next 50 years. Only 50? He teased. We can negotiate the rest. Nate kissed her then and there, as Lily groaned and covered her eyes. And Clara felt whole again, something she never thought possible. The ranch appeared just as the sun was setting. Silas was on the porch, waiting. When the wagon stopped, a wide grin spread across his old face. The whole town looked to be celebrating, he said. I figured that was a good sign. We won, Clara said, her heart soaring as she climbed down. Never had a doubt. Lily bolted past him into the house, already calling for Martha. Silas looked at Clara, his eyes full of wisdom. You did a good thing, he said. Margaret would have been proud of you. Clara's throat felt tight. Do you think so? I know so, he said, tipping his hat. Welcome home, Mrs. Harland. He left her standing there as twilight fell. Nate came to her side. What is on your mind? Clara looked at the life she had built from nothing, at the home that rose from the ashes of her past. I am thinking about that cabin, she said, the one where you found me. I was certain I would die there. I thought it was what I deserved. She turned to him, taking both his hands. But now I know better. Sometimes the worst storms lead to the best outcomes. Love can find you when you are not even looking. And family is not about blood. It is about who you choose. She gave him a soft kiss, full of tomorrow. You chose me, she whispered. Lily chose me. And I will choose you every single day. Nate pulled her in, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Then let us go home, he said. Our daughter is waiting. Our daughter. The words settled deep in Clara's soul and made a home there. They walked inside together. A fire burned brightly in the hearth, and Martha was cooking a meal that smelled of victory. Lily sat on the kitchen table telling her story to anyone who would listen. Clara paused in the doorway, taking it all in. A year ago, she was a broken woman waiting for the end. Now she had this. Lily saw her and ran over. Mama, Martha said we can have cake, a real one with frosting. Clara lifted her into a hug. Then we shall have cake. Can the whole family eat with us? Even the ranch hands, like a big party. Just like a party. Lily hugged her mother's neck tight. I love you, Mama. 4 little words that had remade her world. I love you too, my sweet girl, Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. More than anything. She carried Lily into the kitchen, where Nate was already trying to sneak some frosting. This was her family. A little loud, a little messy, but hers. It was her everything. Much later, after the cake was gone and the stories were told, Clara stood alone on the porch. The night sky was full of stars, like a million tiny promises. She thought about the woman she used to be, the widow in the cabin who had given up. She thought of all she had survived. The storms were meant to break her, but they had not. She had walked through fire and found a reason to live on the other side. She had found a reason to fight. She had found home. The door opened behind her. Nate came out and wrapped a warm blanket around her shoulders. Are you coming to bed? Clara leaned against him, soaking in his warmth. I was just saying goodbye. Goodbye to what? To the woman I was, she said with a small smile. She had her purpose, but I do not need her anymore. Nate kissed the top of her head. And who are you now? Clara took a moment to truly think about it. I am Clara Harland, she said at last. A wife, a mother, a survivor. She paused, then added a new word. Happy. It felt strange and wonderful and true. Good, Nate said, taking her hand. That is exactly who you are meant to be. They went inside, closing the door against the night. The stars kept watch outside. The fire burned bright inside. And in the morning, a new day would begin for a family made by storms and love. A home built on second chances. It was a life that proved that even the most broken things can be made beautiful once more. Clara had opened her door to a stranger in a blizzard, and in doing so, she had found her way back to herself. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.